Hi, Kevin at Ledoux Guitars, the Pragmatic Luthier. I'm back today with a demonstration in hand bending guitar bindings. I hand bend all of my bindings, and I'm quickly moving to hand bending all of my rims as well. Uh, I don't think there's anything too difficult about this really, but as I've observed other YouTube videos, um, I think they forget to take a look at some of the nuances or announce the very tiny things that might be giving people trouble. So I thought I want to walk you through this and see if I can announce some of those things as I go along. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I have virtuosity at doing this. It can be frustrating, and I sometimes I don't hit the target, and I've got to do it all over again. But I'm going to try and walk you through my method and see if it'll help you out a little bit. Before I get started, uh, I advocate making your own binding because it's less expensive if you can do that, and it gives you more choices if you can make your own binding. Couple of binding considerations just as a sidebar. Sometimes you want a binding like this. This happens to be black walnut, and it's lacking character intentionally. This is the quartered face of the binding here, which I've chosen intentionally because I don't want to see a lot of grain. And that's because it's going on this maple rim, which is not highly figured, but there is some curly character in it. And it'll show up nicely after this is finished. I don't want the binding to overspeak, so I was careful about fine grain and the quartered section in that. By contrast, here's a quarter sawn white ash rim, and the grain is plain. So I elected to use flat sawn grain in this binding, and this happens to be bocote, which it speaks very loudly. There's a lot of character in there, and I want that because I want it to match the rosette in the guitar, and even the fingerboard and the headpiece overlay will all match, so it all becomes one thing. So just a couple of considerations. Uh, I don't believe bending a binding, if it's flat sawn or quarter sawn, offers you any different challenges. Um, but run out is what will get you. If the run out across a piece of binding is severe, it's going to be just increasingly difficult to bend because it's likely to split and break right there on that short grain. And extremely figured curly materials can just be a nightmare. I Not too long ago I put curly maple binding on a guitar, and I think I went through 7 pieces to get 4 of them correctly bent because it would just the run out was so quick in it, so at such an angle across that grain. You'd be heating along, you think you're doing fine, and all of a sudden it's in 2 pieces in your hand. Go figure. Anyway, I'm going to turn you back to the bending iron that I've got here and see if I can get in close enough so that you can see what I'm doing, and I'll explain as I go along. Now, I didn't mention in the previous segment, talking about thickness of binding, obviously the thicker it gets, the harder it is to deal with. I really like the look of a thick, strong looking binding, say around 90 thousandths of an inch thick. But even a binding at that thickness can be more challenging. So if you're doing this for the first time or you're working your way into it, I would advocate that you thin your bindings down to 70 thousandths or thereabouts and work with them thinner, and then maybe build your way up as you practice. It might help you out a little bit. So I have my binding all made up. Um, I have a pencil handy, and I keep a container of distilled water. I don't think distilled water is really important, but I have it, so if I do any wetting, I just go with that. Now, I also have already cut the binding channels in the guitar body. I want that done before I do any bending. Some builders will do it a different way, I'm sure, but uh, I've come to enjoy this particular sequence of events. Now I have a scrap of walnut here that I'm going to start with just to get us started in this. this is 90 thousandths of an inch thick. So it's right up there in thickness. And of course, it's a lot wider than just about any binding that you would bend. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wet this. And right now, I'm not really talking about how to get around the shape of the guitar as much as I'm talking about just bending the material. You want your iron hot. Give it plenty of time to warm up. And when you start, you're going to apply your heat. And as you apply just the pressure of your arms or just a little bit more, you'll feel that wood relax. Take a quick look. If it's starting to scorch, you're a little bit too hot. And this is right on the edge of that. But I'm going to leave it there because my thinner binding is going to bend at this temperature very quickly. But you can see and feel that it starts to flex. And when it does, don't get too jumpy with it, but bend it. Don't waste too much time. And you'll find that the wood will actually bend just off the heater better than it will right on it. To use the heater as a fulcrum to push around doesn't seem to me to work quite as well. So I'm bending now with my right hand over here, over here. I'm bending over here and not with my left hand. And I don't try to bend in two directions at once. In other words, don't push with both hands. And you can see that that bends with reasonable impunity. Now I've guesstimated where my first bend needs to be. I always start with a waist bend. I think probably anybody else would. You don't seem to be able to start at one end and chase it all the way to the other end of the guitar. So the waist is where you start. And as soon as this starts to make the bend, then I'm going to push it around here. Now, I will be extremely honest here. The waist bend is the worst one of the bunch. And I have an awful time, more often than not, getting my waist bend just right. And I don't know whether it's because I'm clumsy or whether I've made stupid designs in my waist and they're just not a fair curve that's easy to deal with. So I bring it over after I bent it and I compare it. So I've made my waist bend, and as is my habit, I tend to overbend that waist. If you can get away from doing that, then you're going to be better at this than I am by a long shot. But I have put the waist in its best fitting position, and I'm back on my registration point, and I'm going to have to make correction here and over here. But with very little pressure, and I hope you can see all this. My hands are in the way so much. But right here, there is a tiny gap. Now, it really looks like, I could pull that in with binding tape and I'd be just happy as could be. But if I can get that closer, I'd rather. And this is one of the nuance things I was talking about. If I look at this very carefully and I put a mark on the back of it, I don't know if you can see this well enough or not, but it's actually slightly straight right there. As I hold that up, I can see it right there. Oh, sorry, right there. That has to be corrected. So I'm going to take that over to the iron and see if I can do that. So I've put a couple of pencil marks right where I want to correct that bend. And I can see that it's slightly straight there. And I just put a little bit of water on the back of that to re-moisten that because I want to drive. The water is not what makes the wood bend. I'm sure you know that. It's the steam that the water puts through the wood that drives the heat through. But now I'm just going to correct that ever so slightly. And I find that if you're attentive, you can do this and make it work pretty well. So back over and we'll try it on the guitar. Sorry for switching you back and forth here, but my camera operator up and quit on me 2 days ago, so I have to do all of the videography myself. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. That's now fitting very nicely right in this region that I pointed out before. And I know it can be time consuming and frustrating even to make some of those little corrections. But in these areas where it's hard to pull that stuff in with tape, um, you really benefit from going around the instrument and making those corrections. Now, I'm starting to pull away from the guitar. I'm at my registration mark right here, and I'm starting to pull away from the guitar at this point. So I'm going to put a pencil mark on the outside of the binding where I can see it, and now I'm going to start to progress. And that mark just tells me where I want to get my heat started. I want the heat to come back, but I want the bend to occur from here outward. Now I know this is a little dicey, but I've put my finger on the binding right where I want that heat to start. And yeah, I guess it's a little risky, but that's where I'm starting, and I'm bending with this hand over here, and I'm starting to form my curve. And I'm going to keep forming and checking. And you want to make your bend as even as you can. So you want to keep moving, but progress slowly. And while that's still hot, you can, to some extent, spring that back and forth. So I've got the camera positioned now where you can reasonably see what's going on at the iron and what's going on with the guitar body. You won't be able to focus in too much, but I'll try and talk my way through as I'm finding anything worth mentioning. And I may fast forward some of this when I edit so that you're not having to watch this whole thing blow by blow. So I am in the process of checking, and each time I continue with my bend, I look at where I want it to start and I mark it on the outside of the binding. I will re-moisten if I feel the need. Walnut seems to bend very, very nicely by itself, but a little bit of moisture goes a long way with this stuff, so I don't mind using a little. Bending off to my right side again, just off the iron is where the heat seems to allow that to bend the best. And constantly checking. The more you uh, the more you check, really, the better off you are, because if you try and make a big sweeping bend all in one move, you may very well miss it, especially if you're not doing this constantly. It's just that much more of a learning curve to work around. And I can feel that stuff go around. And I see I got a little bit of a straight spot right here. I want to get that out. Sometimes it's just nuance. And as I mentioned, don't try to bend too far. Just go a ways, stop, and reconsider, reconnoiter, so to speak. Mark there, and now I should be able to just about complete this upper bout. Yeah, I'm looking pretty good. And you may have seen me just pull that away. You can, by just a few degrees, you can pull that back and reshape that curve ever so slightly while it's still hot. All right, a little more bend in that, and that upper bout right in here. Let's check that again. Mark and bend. Now I've also had experience with not just walnut, but with many bindings. See, I overdid a little bit, and see, I'm pulling that back in. I've got finger pressure on that, and I'm just pulling that back out. And a little bit of spring is not going to harm you. But if you've got to get just more than finger pressure on that to make the correction, you might want to reconsider that bend. All right, I was going to mention before this is a little bit overbent. And I've had these things, after you bend them, you get a nice fit, and all of a sudden you look over and they're curled up a little more than they really should be. So binding can be, it can be a little bit frustrating. I've got a little bit of a straight spot right there I'm going to try and pull out. And you can do these little tiny corrections that it actually works. And you just have to develop a feel for that as you go around. How much pressure, how much bend you're actually trying to make. And you can make this work. It really is not as tough as you might think. Although, look who's talking. I'm actually pretty clumsy with bending this stuff. So I'm headed down around my lower bout now. And it looks like my first bend wants to occur here. So once again, I'm marking where I want the heat to start. And you'll feel it start to give just as soon as that wood is warm enough. And you know, you can do this with your bare hands. Uh, Gloves are nice, but I found that the gloves actually kind of get in the way sometimes. You can't really feel the heat as you'd like to. And so it can be a problem there. But you got to find your own way around with this stuff. All right, I've overbent over here. It's pulling the work in, so. But I think we're okay. A little bit. Around a large curve like this, you've got a little more wiggle room that you can deal with. So I'm going to start my bend here and hope to complete this. And now I'm bending off to my left side, and you can see that I'm putting pressure on the left side and just kind of going around a circle, bending it down, bending it down, bending it down as I go around. And let's see how that's working for us. All right, just a little bit farther, I've got a spot here at the back that I want to correct. Can you see that? How right there, that's ever so slightly straight. That's where the trouble spot is. So I'm going to take that out. And if you look at this upper bout, you can see that's pulled in just since I bent it a few minutes ago. So it's kind of tough sometimes, but it's doable, folks. It's doable. All right, I'm happy with this. I can't come to perfection out here because I've left this uncut because I'm going to miter my binding. But it looks like we've got a decent enough fit. Does it fit like a glove? No, it does not. I don't know how many people can make this stuff actually fit so that they can set it in there, and there it is. I'll assume that there's a lot of people that can do that, and if you can find their videos, watch those too. So far, so good. Only 2 more pieces to go. So there's what I know about hand bending your guitar bindings. Um, as I mentioned before, I encourage anybody to make your own bindings as much as you can, because you can have a tremendous variety at your fingertips. Just, I'm showing off here less than half of the binding I have, but I have this stuff in walnut, and I've got it laminated and unlaminated with perfume colors and so on. I have Brazilian cherry, I've got black cherry, beech, white ash, birch, oak, you name it. I think this is even a little bit of zebra wood in here. So, you know, you can make all of this stuff and have it on hand and choose your colors and textures the way you like them. So I'm sure top Luthers didn't need to watch this, but for all of those of you who might be trying to hand bend your bindings, or even if you're bending rims by hand, maybe there's something here that will help you. Thanks a lot for watching. Please subscribe to my channel if you have not. Put a like on the video if you would, please. And until next time, this is Kevin Ledoux at Ledoux Guitars, the Pragmatic Luther. Thanks again for watching my video.